A big concern surrounding sports betting is gambling addiction. Over 80% of Americans gamble on a yearly basis. 3 out of 5 gamblers are struggling with some sort of gambling addiction. So to help combat this, $2 million a year will go to NCDHHS for gambling addiction, education, and treatment programs.
So having the conversation early and often, especially with young children, about the risks associated with gambling, and checking in on your friends. Say one of the best responsible gambling practices you can do with sports betting is not do it alone. Do it with people and check in. Ensure that you're balancing your time with other activities that you enjoy.
All right, so Elon Professor David Bocchino is here answering your questions when it comes to sports betting. You can text the number at the bottom of your screen, any of your sports betting questions. And so my thought are, what are some signs of gambling addiction, and maybe how should you know, like, the money you should be spending versus not?
Yeah, sure. Gambling addiction has a similar signs to other addictions in terms of mood swings, not sleeping, being angry about things that you weren't getting angry about before. One thing I always look for in sports fans is, when are you so far deep into gambling where sports just stops being fun? Sports is supposed to be a community activity. You get together, you watch the game, you cheer as a crowd, whether you're a Wake Forest fan, a Duke fan, a Carolina fan. That's the beauty of sports. It's the community aspect. And if you're isolating yourself and basically worried about some game that it's not related to anything that you've cheered for in the past, that's a problem. So, in terms of getting mad when things don't go your way, that's the biggest warning sign that you can kind of look out for and try to spot that before it gets out of hand.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about this, because I know you wrote a whole book on game on and gambling and things of that nature. What sport has the most gambling associated with it? Is it seasonal? Is it like one versus another?
Yeah, right. So obviously legalized gambling is launching in North Carolina during college basketball season. North Carolina is associated with college basketball. It's not the only sport we've got, obviously, but it's probably our most prominent. It's internationally known, those brands, right? There's going to be a lot of money spent on March Madness pools, which, again, gets into this fuzzy line. Is playing March Madness pools with your Uncle Todd, is that gambling? Some people say it is. Some people say it's just a fun activity. It's tough to say. But a fascinating tidbit came out of the New York data, because New York's had legalized gambling for a while, and a lot of people associate gambling with football. NFL football especially, just say, oh, that's what everyone's talking about, right? The point spread for the Panthers and the Bucks, 6.5. But New York found that the biggest handle, which is the total money being bet, were actually with Major League Baseball and the NBA. Bigger handles than the NFL. And there's an obvious reason for that. There's more games. And so people were able to use more games to basically gamble. And so more money was being bet on baseball and basketball than the NFL. But that's probably not something people would think right off the bat.
Yeah, I definitely would not have thought that for sure. All right, I know we're talking about how, sports betting has gone live here in North Carolina, and it's for those 21 and over. But there could be some teenager-ish people who are betting. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So kind of what I said about March Madness pools, young people get exposed to the idea of gambling and team construction at a very early age. I can remember, playing Madden as a kid and putting together my own team. And then you get into season-long fantasy sports where you're doing fantasy baseball and fantasy football. And then several years ago, about 12, a little more, 15 years ago, daily fantasy sports became a thing. And part of daily fantasy sports was that the idea that this is not gambling. And daily fantasy had to do with this idea is you pick players from certain teams and you bet, you basically join a pool and you get a payout if your team performs the best. And you can do that in a lot of states at 18 plus. And a lot of people say that's just gambling. And there's a very clear legal distinction that it's not gambling, but it's an easy gateway into regular gambling. So a lot of the people who are going to start gambling when they're 21 probably have experience with daily fantasy sports. And the two biggest players in that space are the two biggest players in the sports betting space, which is DraftKings and FanDuel. So you might see a lot of 19-year-olds seamlessly just go 20, 21, and now they're doing daily fantasy and betting on lines and money lines and parlays and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I know they have to make sure and verify that the person is 21 on the online sports betting. And I know you looked at a couple of those different ones to see if they were going to just let anybody on.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And, I assume they wouldn't because they're going through a lot of legal hurdles to get to where they are, and they're not going to sacrifice it by having a bad verification service. And so they are verifying it, and you can do it through your Social Security, the last four digits of your Social Security number. You can do it with your driver's license in some ways, and they match you to databases that they have online that verifies if you're 21. And I went through the process of putting in some wrong information, and they were able to catch that and say that's not good enough. Give us more information about who you are. And so they are doing a good job of verifying who's 21. Now, will young people who are very savvy, very tech savvy, figure out a way around that? I teach college students for a living, and I'm not putting anything past them.
For sure. All right. We're going to continue our conversation with the professor. Right now, though, we're going to take a quick break.